It wasn't the usual fanfare, but a more careful approach in line with COVID-19 protocols for the opening of Parliament today. What hasn't changed is government highlighting the areas that will be given priority attention in the new legislative year and tabling its estimates of expenditure as it gets ready to present the national budget for the new fiscal year in a few days. You can view the full document on the Ministry of Finance's website at mof.gov.jm. Hello there, I'm Adrian Atkinson and welcome to Jamaica Magazine. Coming up in the show, we simplify some of the terms and phrases you'll be hearing during this budget period. Plus, the meaning behind the vibrant colors worn by a mix of servicemen and women during the opening ceremony earlier today, and mediating conflicts in the workplace to find resolutions. But first, let's head over to the news desk with Stephen McHugh.
Good day, I'm Stephen McHugh and this is your JIS News for Thursday, February 18, 2021. Government is to remain focused on its goal of making this the decade of growth for Jamaica, despite the setbacks heralded by the COVID-19 pandemic. This was outlined in the throne speech delivered by Governor-General Sir Patrick Allen during today's ceremonial opening of Parliament. As he outlined government's priorities for the 2021-2022 fiscal year, the Governor-General said the goal was not simply to return Jamaica to its pre-COVID-19 reality.
We must go beyond this and emerge economically and socially stronger by addressing fundamental gaps that have been exposed and exploiting opportunities that arise.
Sir Patrick stressed that a swift recovery could only occur in a stable macroeconomic environment with a supportive legislative and regulatory framework.
Therefore, amendments to the Urban Renewal Tax Relief Act, Financial Administration and Audit Act, Financial Services Commission Act, and Income Tax Relief Large-Scale Projects and Pioneer Industries Act will be undertaken in the new fiscal year to further create a supportive environment for business and investments.
This year's ceremonial opening of Parliament took place in strict adherence to the Ministry of Health's COVID-19 guidelines. Among other things, the usual 100-plus invited guest list was restricted to 6, and members of the public were encouraged to stay home and watch the live broadcast and streams. The number of parliamentarians attending the ceremony was also reduced from 84 to 59, and additional sanitization stations were installed at the entrance to Gordon House. The ceremonial opening was followed by a meeting of the House of Representatives in the afternoon, during which the 2021-2022 estimates of expenditure was tabled. Government is now carrying out a robust security testing and updating of security protocols for data storage on the Jam COVID website. This is to mitigate against the risk of unauthorized access to applicants' personal data. It follows the detection of a security vulnerability with the file storage service on February 16, which was immediately rectified. A statement from the Ministry of National Security reveals that a thorough investigation was initiated to determine if there were any breaches in travelers' data security, if the vulnerability had been exploited, and if there was a breach of any laws. The ministry says the outcome revealed no evidence to suggest that the security vulnerability had been exploited for malicious data extraction prior to it being rectified. But out of an abundance of caution, travelers whose data may have been subject to the vulnerability were contacted and have been assured that steps have been taken to ensure the integrity and confidentiality of the data. At the same time, government is assuring all travelers that it takes data privacy and security seriously and remains committed to stringent security protocols in keeping with local and international standards. In other COVID-related news, the Ministry of Health and Wellness has partnered with private sector stakeholders to accelerate the procurement and administration of vaccines for Jamaica. This is being facilitated under a Memorandum of Understanding signed on Tuesday with the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association, and the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce. Among other things, the partnership will establish points within the private sector through which the population may obtain vaccines. Health and Wellness Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton says this will speed up the phased introduction and deployment of COVID-19 vaccines.
This MOU allows us to move through these groups a lot quicker. In fact, it will enhance the arrangements that are stated in the plan because we are going to attempt to access more vaccines, and by accessing more vaccines, we can deal with the vulnerables quicker and the balance of the population in a much more speedier approach.
The first phase of government's vaccine deployment plan will target health officials and other frontline workers, in addition to vulnerable groups such as the elderly. Dr. Tufton is encouraging persons to take the vaccine when it becomes available, giving assurance that while government is in a hurry to get out the vaccine, it is absolutely careful to ensure that the process is safe for all Jamaicans.
The Standards and Regulations Division has already developed an emergency approval regulatory process for COVID-19 vaccines, which include the adoption of the approach taken by the Caribbean Regulatory System, CRS, of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, that's CARFA, in evaluating and assessing COVID-19 vaccines for emergency use approval by relying on vaccine approval of the WHO and some very stringent authorities, namely the US FDA, Health Canada, and the European Medicines Agency.
A new state-of-the-art elevator is now in service at the Victoria Jubilee Hospital, giving the health facility 2 lifts that provide for quicker and easier movement of staff, patients, and visitors. Minister of State in the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Juliet Cuthbert-Flynn, officially commissioned the new elevator into service on Tuesday.
As you can imagine, a pregnant mother trying to climb some stairs once the elevator was out is not something that we would want to see happen at our hospitals. And so we're very grateful that we've now been able to have 2 working elevators. It is going to be of great help to Victoria Jubilee Hospital. Victoria Jubilee Hospital is the largest women's hospital really in Jamaica, and they see over 7,000 mothers delivering babies on an annual basis.
The National Health Fund, NHF, financed the installation as part of a $143 million initiative to install 8 elevators in hospitals across the Southeastern Regional Health Authority. Members of the Jamaican diaspora in the United States have donated 1,200 tablet computers to local students under government's One Laptop or Tablet per Child initiative. The Foreign Affairs Ministry handed over the devices to the Ministry of Education on Tuesday. Foreign Affairs Minister Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith praised the diaspora for responding to government's appeal for support, revealing that more tablets will be shipped to the island to assist students.
At times such as these, when all countries are facing similar challenges and all children are challenged, these donations are even more appreciated for the thoughtfulness of the donors and the extension of the spirit of charity across borders.
Education Minister Favour Williams agreed that the contribution from the diaspora was very noteworthy and commendable.
It really is an investment in the future of Jamaica. Our education system has been pushed to embrace greater use of technology, and all hands must be on deck to help in bridging the digital divide.
And finally, a 4-lane bridge will be constructed over the Rio Mino in Clarendon as part of the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project. Managing Director of the National Road Operating and Constructing Company, NROC, Ivan Anderson, tells JIS News that preparatory work is now underway.
The bridge sits on 30-foot long piles, which are driven or placed down all the way down into bedrock under the ground. So that's a major activity you'd have seen taking place now. So we're now drilling for the piles. The steel cages are sitting on the ground. You'd have seen them driving past. So once the drilling is completed, then the steel cages will be inserted and concrete will be poured.
He says the design of the bridge has taken into consideration the impacts from past flood events on the Rio Mino.
Taking that into account, we have reviewed the design. So as I indicated earlier when we talked about the project, the bridge, our new bridge, is now 150 meters wide. So it's much wider than the existing bridge. And as I said, it's capable of allowing flows from a storm with a return period of greater than 100 years. So we don't expect to have any similar issues again.
Mr. Anderson, who was speaking at a JIS think tank earlier this week, said drainage in the area would also be significantly improved. And that's it for JIS News Today. I'm Stephen McHugh. Thanks for watching.
The national ID will protect your identity. In these modern times, we all need protection from fraud and identity theft. We're moving Jamaica into the modern era, where your privacy is top priority. Your fingerprint and your picture will secure your ID. This is no different from when you apply for a visa or a passport. Get the facts at nidsfacts.com. NIDS is here for your protection.
It's now time to know the meaning behind some of those vibrant colors we saw during the parade of our servicemen and women.
In ancient societies the world over, colors have been used by armies in battles to symbolize various units or signal a point of reference. This tradition has been passed down in different forms to many generations. In Jamaica, the ceremonial functions of the military partly involve aspects of this color system. A color is the official flag of a military unit. A relic of British traditions, colors form an important part of the ceremonial activities carried out by the Jamaica Defence Force. The Jamaica Defence Force has 3 regiments or divisions, the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Battalion Jamaica Regiments. Each regiment has a specific color assigned to it, along with the Queen's color. The background color for the 1st Battalion is royal blue.
For the 2nd Battalion, that background would be maroon, and for the 3rd Battalion, that background would be green.
The color that resembles the Jamaican flag is known as the Queen's color, symbolizing the monarch as Jamaica's head of state.
The Queen's color is the senior color, and it has on it the St. Edward crown, and it will have the Jamaica Regiment, and in the center you'll have whatsoever battalion that is from, a numeral either 1, 2 or 3. The colors are the pride and joy of the regiment.
Let's take a look at some of the features of the colors for the 1st Battalion Jamaica Regiment. In addition to the royal blue background, the regimental color for the 1st Battalion has gold thread, a wooden pike, a brass tip on the pike, a tassel and Roman numeral 1. One of its features is the St. Edward's crown, a British crown jewel. Another symbol on the regimental color is the crocodile.
The crocodile is a prominent element in the coat of arms of Jamaica. It's indigenous to Jamaica and represents the strength and aggression required of an armed force.
The motto for the 1st Battalion Jamaica Regiment, Forward, indicates the unit's determination, resilience and drive for advancement in all things. The floral wreath is also a component of the regimental color of the 1st Battalion. This wreath has 3 plants or flowers, the Tudor rose, shamrock and the thistle. The Tudor rose, sometimes called the English rose, has 5 petals of pink, red and white. Its symbolism, the battalion's link with British units of the past. The shamrock, which is an Irish Christian symbol of the Holy Trinity, demonstrates that the unit believes in God and Christian values. The thistle, which has sharp prickles, represents nobility. The 2nd and 3rd Battalions Jamaica Regiment also have wreaths with different plants or flowers.
Whenever the colors move with escorts.
In direction right. Come. Follow escort. Freeze. Arms.
With those escorts, they are a conducting warrant officer for the color party, and 2 senior non-commissioned officers that escort the colors, and a color sergeant that stand between both colors when they are in parade.
Now, before the colors are put to use, they have to be consecrated. The Governor General, as a representative of the monarch, usually consecrates and presents the colors to a unit if no royalty is present. And when the colors get old or retired, The Garrison Church of the Ascension at Up Park Camp provides a safe haven.
When it is retired, it is not just thrown away. It is laid up, and that's another parade that is done. In the Jamaica Defence Force, it is in this church that the whole colors are laid up. And that's a whole ceremonial parade by itself, because there are certain procedures that we go by in laying up the colors.
So the next time you see the Jamaica Defence Force carrying out its ceremonial responsibilities, take a look at the colors and remember the profound meanings of the various symbols. It's more than just a piece of cloth. It's the pride and joy of whichever unit it represents.
The Disabilities Act will protect the rights of all persons with disabilities. And here's a great teaching moment. Every person with a disability, like a deaf or hard of hearing child, for example, has the right to an education with accessible facilities and the support they need. In this case, it would be a teacher who can use the language of the deaf, which is sign language. Visit jcpdja.com. A message from the JCPD, an agency of the Ministry of Labour and Social Security.
The tabling of the 2021-2022 estimates of expenditure officially marks the start of the budget period. And as the days go by, you will hear terms and phrases that you may not be familiar with, like GDP and macroeconomy. To keep you informed and to help you understand the conversations, we break them down just for you.
So we're in the budget season, and during this time, we hear all kinds of big terms, like inflation and net international reserves. But what do they mean? Financial analyst Dennis Chung will be here to break down those terms inside Budget 101. Now let's start with the term budget.
A budget is really just an expectation of what you want to happen. And the reason why I do a budget is because you want to ensure that you are getting the revenues that you expect. So the budget allows you now to create the initiatives around that and also to control the expenses so that you don't spend more than you earn.
Miscellaneous, 5,000. Lunch, 5,000. Wow, my budget looking good for this month. At least I don't owe anybody.
Well, the government does practically the same thing. This is how the process works. The budget process begins with a budget call being sent out to all ministries, departments, and agencies of the government. Included in this call is a specific figure, or what is called a budget ceiling, in which they should operate. Cabinet then decides based on their programs if they should get more money. After that, the budget book is prepared and sent to the printing office. The Governor General then makes his throne speech outlining the government's plan, and usually later in the day, the Finance Minister tables the budget in the lower house. The Standing Finance Committee of Parliament will then meet to query the details or make changes to the budget where necessary. That's followed by the various budget presentations in Parliament. When those have been made, the budget is passed and the ministries, departments, and agencies begin to receive their monthly allocations. And that's how the process works. So now that you understand the process, let's move on to the terms. Take, for example, economy.
The economy is really the accumulation of all the activity that takes place from working. So all the activities that is into production or consumption or anything like that, that has a value, that creates a value.
There's also something called GDP deflator, which measures the changes in the overall prices.
All the production in manufacturing, the output that comes from that, all the tourism services, all the value added created in the economy for that year is your gross domestic product. GDP is your production locally. Your economy is all economic activity that happens. So your GDP is really a subset of your economy.
Then there's this one. So if I hear that inflation is going up by 10%?
Inflation is just the movement of prices from one year to the next. Or you can look at it from even 1 month to the next, because we do measure it monthly. It means that on an average, you're paying 10% more than you did before. Now, remember that inflation is just a measurement, an average measurement based on the basket of goods that they measure. Your fiscal deficit is really looking at all your revenues and your recurrent expenditure. So you take your revenues, how much money do I earn from taxes, how much money do I get from grants, and then I look at my recurring expenditure and deduct that from my revenue. We've been running a fiscal surplus for a few years now. If your expenditure is greater than your revenues, then that is when you have a fiscal deficit.
Net International Reserves, or NIR, as Dennis Chung puts it, is simply the difference between Jamaica's foreign assets and foreign liabilities.
The Net International Reserve is really, after you look at all the charges that you have against your reserve and all the assets you have in terms of foreign exchange reserve, how much is left in terms of net. What the NIR measures is really how many weeks of imports we can safely have. So I think the standard is about 12 weeks of imports of NIR you want to have. So if you are importing $100 per week, right? You want to know that you have 12 times $100 at least sitting at the BOJ, that if there's an emergency and there's a shutdown of production and there's no value created in the economy for whatever reason at an extreme, at least I have 12 weeks of money there that I can go and buy things from overseas and pay my overseas debts and keep my economy moving. Your macroeconomy is your overall economy. And most times when people talk about economy, they're really talking about the macroeconomy. So how has inflation moved overall? The microeconomy now looks at the economy from the point of view of the individual or the firm. So my economy from a micro point of view might be different from the macroeconomy.
Recurrent expenditures are expenses that always come on the budget, like wages and salaries. Think of it like your utility bills, water, electricity, or cable. And with that, we conclude Budget 101. I'm sure you've all learned something, and I'll give all of you a passing grade. I'm Theodore Henry. Do take care.
I'm Nigel Clark. I'm the Minister of Finance and the Public Service. We want a public service that is fair, a public service that values people, and a public service that delivers high quality services. And in order to do so, we need to transform the public service. Jamaica competes in a global environment. The technology has transformed the way in which the world works. And for us to remain competitive, the public service needs to be in a position to deliver services effectively, efficiently, and in good time.
Brought to you by the Transformation Implementation Unit.
Working together usually comes with some level of disagreement, which do not have to disrupt the workplace. But when these start to escalate, it's time for intervention. And the dispute resolution will tell us why and how.
Is unhealthy for productivity in the workplace. You guys can't continue like this. And she come in the morning
I'm trying to show her, she just acts like idiot.
Alright, so here what? I have a video from the Dispute Resolution Foundation that I think you guys need to watch. Come with me.
A conflict is at its most fundamental, a disagreement. Workplace conflict has a number of significant impacts. There's a cost to conflict at the workplace. So someone seeing a dispute between two employees or between employees and the employer being played out in public might be inconvenienced by what is happening, but they're unaware of what's the cost. There are all kinds of costs, from personal costs, health costs, reputational costs, to financial costs. So conflict can impact somebody at the workplace. It can impact the production and productivity of the business. If you think of it, any workplace could find that between a supervisor or just between two employees, there could be an unresolved conflict and it affects how they work. So if we have to work in a way that says your work is affecting mine and vice versa, and we're not getting along, then over time what will happen is that we tend not to be very productive because we're not communicating with each other, we're not responding, we're not engaged. So it affects the organization's relationship internally, it affects the dynamics of that, it affects productivity, it affects communication, it affects a number of things. So simple things like management decisions may be impacted by conflict at the workplace.
Mediation is very, very important in order to solve conflicts like these and to ensure that we have productivity.
Conflict resolution is a very broad term used to describe different approaches to try and manage conflict when conflict occurs. So mediation is just one of those processes, a very structured process in which a neutral third party who is trained helps disputing parties to come to a resolution of their dispute. Now, at the workplace, that will be helping them to negotiate. So they may be unable to negotiate by themselves, so they may get somebody who is external to each of them to help them to resolve that dispute, and that person would play the role of a mediator.
So guys, this is where I come in, to sit with you both and to discuss the issue further. But before we get to the meat of the matter, there is just one more point to note.
Now, in order to do that, the mediator has to have some very effective communication skills. So how does the mediator communicate? And communicate in a way that includes both verbal and non-verbal, but at the same time interpreting what is it that the verbal and non-verbal cues that are coming from the parties. What are those cues saying? So the mediator has to be very effective at communication. Now, helping the parties to communicate may be a part of the communication, the larger communication skills of the mediator. However, at a particular point in time, mediator has to help the parties to negotiate. So the mediator has to be au fait with what negotiation is about, how are the parties negotiating, and help them to be able to negotiate in a way that settles the dispute that they have.
Alright, so as you guys can see, conflict is not new. Today was probably the first for you guys, and it maybe won't be the last. But based on the video that you've just seen, you can now tell the true effect of what conflict can do within the organization. So you see, it's very important for you to practice mediation and proper conflict resolutions. Now, having seen or heard all of that, what really happened today?
This is where our journey ends, but only for today. Do join us again tomorrow when we'll bring you another informative program. In the meantime, stay connected via our website, jis.gov.jm. And while you're online, send your feedback to Jamaica Magazine at jis.gov.jm or via tweet at JIS News. You may also find us on all the major social media platforms and through our mobile app that's Android and iOS compatible. On behalf of the entire production crew, I'm Adrian Atkinson. Thanks for watching.
This has been a production of the Jamaica Information Service, the voice of Jamaica.